Hello Bitzbox, this is Craig from Bitzbox.co.uk here, and in this video I'm going to be talking about resin 3D printing, and more specifically, just the sort of things that maybe I think are good for people to know if you're thinking about getting into resin 3D printing. So I've been doing this now for about 4 months, and it was something I was debating for a long time, and so I'm sort of aiming this video at those of you who may have been in the same boat, where you're thinking about resin 3D printing, but you're not quite sure. And yeah, this video I'll just try and talk you through it. And yeah, I'm going to act as if I'm talking to myself from a few months ago and trying to sort of convince myself to get into it, because I love it. I know some people don't enjoy the process as much as others, but I do. I'm really enjoying it so far. Maybe it's because it's all still quite new to me, I don't know, but yeah, let's get into it. I've got a little list of things to talk about. So yeah, I'm going to crack on with that. So the first thing is, so if you're new to 3D printing entirely, then there's two types of 3D printing sort of on the mass market. There's other things, there's metal 3D printing and whatnot, but typically most people will print FDM or resin. So in the miniature wargaming world, typically people will say FDM is for your terrain and resin's for your miniatures. Now you can print terrain on resin, you can print miniatures on FDM, and there's more cons than pros to doing it that way round, I suppose. Resin, you are limited on size, and although there are bigger resin 3D printers coming in the market, however, resin is still fairly expensive, so to print large, massive pieces of terrain in resin will still cost a pretty penny, however, still cheaper than buying a massive resin terrain piece, I'm sure. So people will typically use FDM, and you can print miniatures on FDM, but the level of detail isn't quite there, although it's getting better than it used to be. So yeah, but I haven't dabbled in FDM yet, but I am tempted, so that might be something you'll see on the channel in the future. But anyway, we're here to talk about resin 3D printers, and yeah, they're good for miniatures, and I'm loving them so far. And they also print faster than FDM typically. So the way FDM works, you have a reel of filament, and it goes into a nozzle, it gets heated up, and the nozzle and the bed sort of moves around and prints piece by piece. Resin doesn't sort of work like that. Resin is all done with layers. So whether you have a tiny Space Marine shoulder pad or a whole bed full of shoulder pads, it will take the same time to print because you're doing layer by layer. I hope that makes sense. There's millions of videos on YouTube you can watch too, to find people who can explain it better than me, but yeah. Essentially, you have your resin in the vat, you have your build plate comes down, and then each layer will get UV light to cure that layer. And you're talking like really tiny layers. So typically a 28mm figure will have over 1,000 of these layers, and each layer is a few seconds to cure. So yeah, it does take a few hours to print stuff still, but the waiting time's well worth it. To see your miniature come off the printer is really cool. Yeah, we'll get into the miniatures themselves as well, because one thing I want to talk about is how you actually come and get files to print. Obviously, most people aren't going to be able to design their own miniatures or create their own files. However, there are some talented people in this world who make absolutely stunning miniatures. And yeah, there's so many about now. I am actually going to do a whole video about some of my favourites that I've come across. There's a lot of good designers on Patreon offering some amazing stuff, and I definitely want to do a video talking about them in the future. But yeah, there are websites you can go on. Yegi is a good one, YEGGI. Really good search engine to find stuff. You may have already heard of websites like Shapeways and Thingiverse. Loads of cool stuff on there in terms of miniatures and just general stuff as well. And there is a bit of novelty to it. So when I basically caved in and bought a resin 3D printer, I now have two. I caved in after basically looking online at loads of different designs that were available. There was a bit of novelty to it at first, so I did start off by printing some like Simpsons stuff and things like that, things from films and TV and things like that, rather than just sort of miniatures. Then I sort of dabbled in D&D miniatures, and just now I'm signed up to a few Patreons and printing some of their stuff. But yeah, I'm really sort of into doing this now to find just nice and unique miniatures to paint. As you can see, I've got loads of like Warhammer GW stuff, and obviously we sell that stuff for a living. So I'm always surrounded by that, but it's nice to go with different aesthetics and just print stuff myself, and then you know, get it all washed and cured and then paint them like in the same day. It's fantastic. It's just awesome. So I did mention at the beginning of this video, I'm going to give some tips on things that you need to know. So I've sort of briefly just covered where you can find files. And when it comes to actually 3D printing themselves, so when you have obtained the files online, downloaded them, bought them, got them for free, whatever. There's so much stuff what is free, but some things you do have to pay for. Once you've got them, you now need to slice them. And I think there's another area where people might get put off a little bit, but it's dead simple, really. You load up something like Bitzbox. I've been using that because that was recommended by the manufacturer of the 3D printer. I know some people don't like it, but I swear by it myself. It's really good for beginners, definitely. And yeah, you load up your file in there, and then you need to add supports. It is paramount that you add supports to your miniature design. Some stuff are offered pre-supported, which is brilliant. So this may seem a bit daunting at first. However, things like Bitzbox do have an auto support function where you can literally press a button and it'll add all the supports for you. I do recommend adding a few extras as well, because I don't really trust that feature very well. And I think that's one reason why people don't like the software as much. But it's dead simple to add more, and you can actually see areas in red. The software will tell you where your supports should be. So any areas in red should have some supports. You don't need to fill them up entirely with supports, but I like to have a lot in these areas just to make sure we get no failures, because you will get failures. And things will happen, and your prints will fail. It doesn't happen that often, and if you know how to troubleshoot them, then it's really not that big of a deal. So yeah, once you've done that, you can then click the export button or slice button and stick on a little USB stick, plug in your printer, and away you go. So yeah, I do want to talk about troubleshooting, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in the video. So let's say your print was absolutely flawless, and you've just got it off the printer. Next thing you have to do is clean it up and cure it. Now, again, this is the main thing for me, which I found off-putting before I actually done it. The whole thought of having just to wear like loads of PPE and play around with chemicals and things like that. It's not really like that so much. I've been using the water washable resin stuff. So this stuff, here's your Lego stuff. I know some people don't like it as much as the regular stuff that was washed with IPA, but I've had no issues with it. And when I first started, if you've seen the video when I first got into this, I was just using an ultrasonic cleaner with some water in it, putting the prints in there, sticking it on for a few minutes, and then curing them under a little UV nail lamp. I've since upgraded to a wash and cure station, which just makes everything so much easier. And to be honest, one day I'll probably end up with two, one for washing, one for curing, because the minor inconvenience of switching between the wash and the cure thing, yeah. Maybe when I do like printing a lot more often, that'll probably just start annoying me a bit more. It's such a minor inconvenience, and I probably sound like such a posh git for wanting to just for that, but yeah. So yeah, that does seem a bit often, but it's just a case of sticking on some gloves. I do recommend wearing a mask. I'm going to talk about this in a future video, because I'm going to do like a buy-in guide on things that you need and things that you could get to aid your 3D printing. So I'm probably going to save all that for that. But it's really not a massive deal. Stick on some gloves, stick on your little PPE. You don't have to have a full hazmat suit or anything like that. And literally, you know, just if you've got a wash and cure machine, you just chuck them in and press a button. It's not that big a deal. If you use an IPA, I mean, you can put IPA in these things, but if you use an IPA, a lot of people will have just 2 buckets of IPA, and you just dunk them in, swirl them about, and then rinse them off. It's just not that hard to do, really. It takes a matter of minutes. And, you know, sometimes if you buy resin stuff from somewhere like Forge World, you normally have to wash them with soapy water to get all the mold release off. So it's no worse than that. If anything, it's even easier than that. And then you just cure them under a UV lamp, and literally for another few minutes, and then you have a beautiful print, and away you go. Yeah, don't be put off by that. You do need a little area to do it. That's why we use this area behind us. Ideally, you should have some sort of rubber mats or something down to protect the surface. I'm not really too fussed about this, although I do have a cutting mat there. And also in front of me here, I've got a cutting mat where I do a lot of cleanup as well. So yeah, just like cutting mats or rubber mats or just plastic trays or whatever. Something like that. But again, I'm going to go into all this in a buying guide in the future. So yeah, that's another thing you need to know. Sometimes they can give off fumes. These are Lego Mars 2 Pros are brilliant for not doing that. That is one of their key selling points. They really don't give off much fumes at all, which I really like. They're so quiet as well, you wouldn't know they were even going. They're not going now, but if they were, you wouldn't really hear too much. So they're really good for that. Just bear in mind if you have got one that has a bit more fumes, and maybe you want it in a bit more of a ventilated area. But at the same time, you don't want them to be too cold, so it's a bit of a pain. They do seem to operate a lot better around sort of room temperature or slightly higher, so just bear that in mind. You don't want them to be anywhere that's really cold, so you don't really want to be sticking them out in your shed if you can help it. Obviously over the summer months, or depending on where you live, of course, then it might not be an issue, but yeah, you don't want them really dealing with sub-zero temperatures. So yeah, another thing to bear in mind. But like I say, this video is to try and sort of convince people that it's not so bad, rather than give them a list of reasons where they can be a pain. Which brings me nicely onto troubleshooting. So there's always going to be failed prints. I think I've got a few laying around. I was doing some defiler legs for someone, and that one just failed there miserably. I think it's all down to just some faulty supports. Supports not holding can be a right pain in the bum, but very easy to fix because you just go back to your slicing software and just add a few more, and boom, away you go. So that doesn't happen very often, because you get to a point where you sort of just know what you need. So that's something what can happen. Leveling. These are very easy to level. I recommend using that spirit level to make sure the actual printer itself is level, and then there's a whole leveling process to level the build plate. It takes 2 minutes. Very easy to do. We call it the paper trick. So you basically take your build plate down to a paper, and then you raise it up very slightly until you can just pull that paper out, and then that is the exact height, exact level, and ready to print, basically. With these Lego Mars, I don't know if it's the same with a lot of printers, but I have heard with the Lego Mars printers that they do tend to go off a little bit more than others. So it's worth every now and then just doing the re-leveling thing just to make sure they're okay. But most of the time they seem alright. I mean, I've been using this one most of the week and I haven't had to re-level it, so I've printed a few things off on that and it's been absolutely fine. Also, the FEP film on the bottom of the little trays, this one needs replacing. After a while, you can see in the middle there, I don't know what's happened there, but it's yeah, it's not looking good. So this all needs to be replaced. It is a pain in the backside to replace this, I won't lie. Every little hole you see on the back here, including the small ones, is a little tiny screw. It doesn't take too long to do, maybe about 20 minutes. But yeah, it's not a job I like. That's why that one's been sitting there for about 2 weeks. So I've only been using the one printer. That's one good thing about having two printers, is that if you need to replace your FEP, you just use the other printer. But that's alright if you can afford to do that. But yeah, so that's something. Usually that may cause prints to fail if your FEP. I mean, this is basically, I don't trust this not to leak resin onto your screen. That's the last thing you want to happen. So just always keep checking your FEP and make sure that's okay. But yeah, prints can stick to the FEP. That's a bit of an issue. Doesn't happen to me very often now. I think when I first started that was happening a little bit. It's basically just something you can sort out in your printer settings. The manuals come with settings that you can put into your software. It's worth knowing as well, actually. You have default. You can change your default settings to match your printer on your software, but you can change it. You get the option to then change it for each print. So if a certain print might need a bit more exposure time or something like that, you can actually just put that in as you slice for software, as you slice for file. So that information is contained within each print and file that you do. Hard to sort of explain it, but when you sort of get into it, you'll know exactly what to do. Yeah, I think sometimes for lift speed and things like that, I'm not really that sort of clued up on all that, but I really haven't had many issues. Another way that can happen, I think the only way that's really happened for me is just not having a level build plate. Because then what happens is if you build plate slightly off, it will pull up the resin from that side but not from that side, and that's how it gets stuck to the build plate. So I think that's the most common way that resin gets stuck to your FEP. But of course sometimes it might need replacing as well. So just bear that in mind. But yeah, basically any issue, I always suggest just try and level your build plate first and see if that fixes it. But you'll know if it's a support issue, because then you end up, because that is when you end up with stuff like this. So yeah, it's something of just experience. Honestly, I've only been doing this 4 months, but I already feel like I've learned so much in this. Another way that you so one way that you can learn so much, not just by doing it, but there's some really awesome Facebook groups out there. I'll link some in the description below. Loads of good YouTubers in the 3D printing world, and now there's this idiot as well. I'm here trying to help people, so yeah, I can't recommend that enough. Just getting involved in these groups. I've actually found myself answering people's questions on 3D printing. I've only been doing this for 4 months, and already I'm able to help people with advice, which is just really cool. It's great. And if I need any help myself, I can just go on Facebook groups and get an answer, which is really cool. And then people share off stuff they printed, what they printed, and things like that, which is what we all love. We all love to do. And just the last point I have on here is that this is addictive. If you already come from a miniature painting background, then you'll know how addictive it is just buying miniatures, and you end up with stuff like this. And this is not even a fraction of what I own. It's the same with this. You'll end up printing loads of stuff and not painting them. That's how it goes. Especially at first. It's such a novelty at first. You really just, like, these printers were just going non-stop. And even now, like I say, I've been printing most of the week, just some other stuff. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to do a video on different Patrons, so I'm sort of in the process of printing stuff and painting stuff from my favourite patrons and design companies, so that's really cool. I'm looking forward to doing that video, and hopefully I can get that done in a couple of months. Yeah, so that's about all there is to say on Resin 3D printing. However, if you do have any questions, then do chuck them in the comments. Maybe there's something really obvious that myself, who's still technically a novice, maybe there's something really obvious that I've missed. If you've got any advice that you feel is vital for new people getting into this Resin 3D printing world, then definitely leave your comments down below. It really is such a community driven thing, which is just fantastic. I love being a part of it, and yeah, long may it continue. It's really cool. So if you are on the fence about getting one, then I hope I've given you that little push to maybe get into it. Your wallet might not thank me, but I hope you will. So all that's left to say is thank you so much for watching. I'll have a buying guide in the future, so look out for that. If you want to stay up to date with everything, then there is a subscribe button down below, little bell icon and all that jazz. Give a video a thumbs up if you did enjoy it. I'll see you all again very soon.